Good morning, all. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to get started. Okay, I know that folks will continue to join, but I'd love to just get us started. Welcome, everyone, to Face 2024. This is our very first session of our virtual conference. We're just so excited and thrilled that you have joined us. So this is Assessment in the Drama Classroom, a culturally responsive and student-centered approach. My name is Kinsey Keck. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with brown hair, goes a little bit past my shoulders. I'm wearing a cozy charcoal gray t-shirt and a gold necklace and some large round wire-framed glasses, and my background is blurred. I am also the programs director here at the Roundtable. The Roundtable is a grassroots service organization that works to improve and advance the state of arts education through professional development workshops, advocacy, and online resources and platforms to connect the arts education field. Although we are currently meeting via Zoom online, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we work and live on unceded lands. Mannahatta, or the place that is widely known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. We would like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and immigrant communities which have helped build the city that we know today. As we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, we would like to uplift a handful of contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that we can all support and learn from. And I will just put those in the chat here in a moment. So I encourage you to take a moment, save these links, check out these organizations later, support them if you can, preferably with donations. Also encourage you to look for similar organizations in the area that you're in, and welcome anyone to share and uplift any organizations like that in the chat with those on the call today. Thank you. So just a few reminders. First of all, a very, very big thank you to our conference sponsors. Face-to-Face could not happen without them. We are incredibly grateful to them. Today, we have 3 conference sponsors that have brought you specifically this session. So just want to do a quick shout out to those organizations. First is 92NY Dance Education Laboratory, also known as DEL. We'd also like to thank the City College of New York's graduate program in educational theater, of which I am an alum. Thank you, CCNY. And NYU Steinhardt's program in educational theater as well. So you'll be hearing more about these sponsors throughout the conference, but just want to acknowledge them and give them the biggest thank you for making this possible. Okay, just a few more reminders and then we'll get going. So if you're having trouble at all with Zoom, please send me a private message. My name is Kinsey. I am here to help. Please do keep your mic on mute unless you are the person speaking so we can all hear each other clearly. We encourage you to use the chat to ask questions and connect with other folks who are here. We will have a little bit of time for Q&A, so please make sure that you put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. This meeting does include live ASL interpretation, as well as automatic closed captions via Zoom. So to activate your captions, you can navigate to your toolbar, click Show Captions. That may also be under the More button, and then you'll find that there and can turn those on. And lastly, this session is being recorded and will be made available to registrants at the conclusion of the conference. That will likely be at the end of next week, just given everything that's going on. So please do be patient with us with those recordings, but we will get them to you as soon as we can. And that is it from me. Now it is my sincere pleasure to turn it over to our presenter for today. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan P. Jones. Jonathan is faculty at NYU Steinhardt and BMCC. And Jonathan is also chair-elect at the American Alliance for Theater and Education. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome, and it's all you.
Thank you so much, Kinsey, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. It's been quite a journey for me up to this point. I started as a student here in the program in educational theater at NYU Steinhardt, 27 years ago. And so the time that I've spent invested with folks here, particularly in New York City, is significant. I was born in Brooklyn myself, and I am really glad to be here with you today. I am a biracial male with a buzzed haircut and salt and pepper peach fuzz of a beard. I'm wearing a black button-down shirt, and I am joining you from my office at NYU Steinhardt in the unceded lands of the Munsee and Lenape people. The background of my screen is blurred at this moment. And on the screen right now, I'm showing a picture of a young girl who appears to be Black, and she is participating in a dance experience in a classroom setting, wearing a sort of uh, costume that is looks like it's been torn or ripped, or that it is, I think, meant to represent someone who is maybe a fairy, maybe someone of the woodlands or otherwise. And I chose this picture to be on the cover of this book that I've written, Assessment in the Drama Classroom, because when I saw the picture, I had been thinking about why I wrote this book, who it was for, what I was trying to achieve in writing the book. And on the one hand, I was writing it for the teachers, in recognition of the fact that there are many books that are written about education in general, and even drama education in particular, but that there are or had been no books that were specifically about assessment in the drama classroom. And so I thought, what is it, what kind of image is going to capture something that I thought was kind of monumental? And I thought the image that was most important to share was one of a young person in the classroom doing the drama work. Because to me, assessment is very much about uh, two pieces. One, sort of charting the experience, growth, development of the young people that we're working with. And on the other hand, it's about making sense of the efficacy of our work. And I thought that this image really spoke to that. In the book, I start out with a story about a classroom teacher who I observed working in the greater London area of the UK. And I've been to her classroom many times, but on this one day, we arrived in the drama studio, black box space, and she had taped a line across the center of the room. And when the observers arrived, when the high school students arrived, she told us that we were all going to sit behind the line, so that there would be sort of one part of the room that would have both a playing space, but also some extra space, unclear what that extra space was for. And then the line was there, and we're all behind the line in what we presumed to be the audience space. The audience space was rather small and cramped, and we were in very close quarters with one another. And she sort of, leaned into myself and the graduate students I was with from NYU. And she said to us, "Don't worry, I'm going to be here that long. It's okay." And so what happened was the students were, they were not having a final performance of scenes that they had been working on, but rather it was kind of like a dress rehearsal moment. And so each group was going to present their scene for the rest of us. And so we start out with the first group, they get up, they go into the playing area, and they perform their scene. And what we kind of expected, I think, in that moment was that the performance was obviously the assessment task that the students would perform these scenes that they had prepared, but that the assessment of that would be some sort of evaluation of their performance. But that wasn't the assessment really at all. It was a part of it, but a very small part of it. The main part of the assessment was the analysis and evaluation that the student audience members could give of that performance. And so she told them, they were going to be rated on a scale of 1 to 4. They have been working on this. They understood what was expected in a response to a performance, whatever that the criteria was that she had established for that response. And individually, each student would have to give some kind of response. And just to sort of give a bit of that, the idea was that they had to make some commentary on the specific criteria that they were looking for in the performance, and also that they had to use some evidence from the performance to support that. And so one at a time, the students sort of raise their hands, some of the sort of eager students at first, to share their response to the performance that they watched. And then the teacher in the moment gives them feedback. Oh, great, that's a level 3 response. Look at how you gave such great evidence. Or rather than just parroting to them, saying to them what it was that was expected, she would ask them, okay, so how do we create a level 3 response? What makes a level 3 response into a 4? What does that look like, okay? If somebody gave a response that was not quite there yet. And so she might say, okay, we're operating at about a level 2 here. What's it going to look like to be a level 3? How are we going to get you there? And so we go through the motions of the 5 or 6 groups giving their presentations. And the thing is, as the students are giving their responses to those presentations, as they are getting their evaluation from the teacher in this practice moment, this dress rehearsal moment, she tells them, all right, if you've gotten a score of a level 3 or 4, you're going to sit in front of the line. So that one at a time, the students are moving ahead of the line until there are fewer and fewer of us who are behind the line. Now, of course, let's just be transparent. This is a very high focus, what might seem like a high stakes kind of encounter for the young people. But for them, the reality is that they talk about how they're being assessed, how they're being evaluated all the time. It's part of the culture of the classroom. And so if a student isn't able to give a response that's going to sort of meet the mark, meet the expectation that's been laid out, the teacher will support them, the students can support one another, and that there very much was an atmosphere of support, that we're in this endeavor together. We have some final assessment moment that will come at the end where we all have to do this individually and on our own, but we're not there yet. And that right now, in this moment where we are in a space of learning, when we're sharing in that experience, we can be supportive of one another in that endeavor. Now that happened 13 years ago. It made such an impact on me as such a clear illustration of what assessment could be. I don't know for sure that it should be, because sometimes certainly the high focus nature of that, the high stakes nature of that is not always appropriate. But in that moment, I thought, this is really fascinating. And afterwards, the teacher said to us, the real job of the teaching, the real work is to figure out, you've got just a few students who are left there who are behind the line. How am I going to support them? How am I going to scaffold our learning experience that's going to get those last few to be where they need to be, or perhaps where they want to be? All right, how am I going to help them? And that really is very much what assessment in the drama classroom is all about, that we're going to have some way of measuring, of providing evidence of the learning that's going on in the classroom, and that we're going to be mindful of bringing all of the students along on that journey. Okay? So in my session today, I should warn you, for those of you who aren't familiar with me and my work, I am a notorious over planner. So in all likelihood, we won't get to all of the bits because I am so invested in this work that my intention going into this is that I want to give you all of it. Okay, I want to tell you all of the bits that I think are important and essential for you to know, and that are going to be able to support you as an educator and your students as learners. And well, that's a whole class, of course, and we don't have time for a whole class, but I'm going to do my best to get through as much of it as I can. I'm going to share with you the slides that I'm presenting now so that you have access to them later. And certainly, I'll share my email and contact information so that in the future, as you're working through anything, a plan, you're having an experience out in a residency or otherwise, and you're like, oh, we really need to be doing something here and it's not happening yet. What do I do? Phone a friend, send me an email, contact me immediately, because I'm really committed to this work. And the fact that you have shown up for me, it is really the least I can do to show up for you. So here in our agenda, that we're going to start with some goal setting and KWL, and I'll talk about that. We'll look at what do we teach. I'm going to focus for a moment just highlighting this provocation that I have here about being explicit, which is short but important. Then we'll look at some ways to formalize assessment practices. If we get to it, I might go through a sample lesson so that you see some of the thinking, and the lesson might be a little unusual for some of you, and for others very familiar. So we'll just sort of deal with that. We'll have time for discussion, and then at the end, we'll have a reflective moment about what we learn. I say smiling and laughing because no matter how long these sessions go, I never have enough time to get to that. But I do want to share with you now. Let me figure out how my computer works here. There's the chat. I need to share some links with you. And so right now, the links that I posted there include a Google document that we're going to be working with throughout our time this morning. Then there's a link to a PDF of this PowerPoint, and I don't think I made any changes since I made the PDF last night. So hopefully what's there is accurate. And then the last thing, that the Rutledge people have been kind enough to publish this book. I guess I'm supposed to promote it. And there is a promo code that's available if you were interested in purchasing the book, although I think that they're running a discount right now anyway. So I'm not sure if the promo code even will work because it's discounted, but that's available, and that's what the QR code is on the screen. And that is as much of a promotion as I'm willing to do. Because really, I want to get to the work that we need to do, which is starting with a KWL. Now, KWL might be a format that some of you are familiar with. It is at the first stage, K meaning know, what do we know about something, W, what do we want to know, and L, what have we learned. But we're going to start just by looking at this idea of the K, all right? And so this is in that first link that I shared with you, the Google Doc. And I want you just to reflect on what you know about assessment in the drama classroom. And here on the screen, I say, consider facts, concepts, procedures, but also feelings. How do you feel about assessment in the drama classroom? And when we go to that Google document, which I'm sharing now on the screen, you'll see that there's a column there that says K, and there's a bunch of bullets there. So I'm going to add some more bullets because we've got a lot more people than there are bullets on the screen right now. And just take a bullet, post whatever you like there on the screen. What are some things that you know about assessment or assessment in the drama classroom? Because certainly not all of us are necessarily drama educators. If you can't access the document, certainly you could post things in the chat and I can put them into the document for you. Okay? All of our anonymous writing, very well. So people are typing. I'm going to read through some of these just for my own processing in the moment. And I can just say like my initial reaction to some of what I'm seeing is that we are in alignment, that some of the ideas that are being shared resonate with my thoughts about assessment, but also some of the ideas that we'll be covering today. And we'll go into some details so that we can have some shared knowledge about some of these ideas that are here. So assessment criteria should be specific and observable. Assessment can capture many things, but not everything. Assessment is easily misused. They are most effective when co-created with participants. Assessments create a shared language and can build community. We'll hear quite a bit about some of those ideas there. Can have social and emotional learning components. We'll look at that to get them involved in how students grow through these skills, setting SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Apologies to the ASL interpreter as I'm reading very quickly. Uh, Clear expectations, and expectations may be different for different students, you bet. Student testimonials are key. Being curious about students' experiences and expectations, asking questions to gather information about their passion, creative expressions, culturally informed experiences and interests, you bet. Formative assessment is critical, assessment as learning or assessment for learning, we might say, all right. Multiple forms of assessment, written and performative. I feel a tension between process versus product. Well, the example lesson, if we go through that, is about process-based work for just that reason. Because I think product-based work is something that we're all quite familiar with and can make sense of without me having to go through a step-by-step example. Can be done through observation, written assignments, presentations, etc. You bet. Inform the speed and scope of future lessons. I love that. Gathering certain data from students may require parental consent and an IRB process, certainly, particularly depending on what it is that you're going to do with those assessment results going forward. Assessment should not be scary. It should not be scary. Assessment should not be scary. I love that. Okay, so if you want to add additional ideas to the chart there under the K column, that is fine. We'll come to the W column in a moment. But before we do, I just want to alert you of some of my background with assessment. So I mentioned that I started here at NYU quarter of a century ago, which I have to laugh about because it's so absurd that so much time has gone by. I remember it like it was yesterday. But after I did my undergrad degree here and then did my master's in educational theater, I then was a high school teacher in Los Angeles for 5 years at North Hollywood High School. And while I was there, I was teaching both English and drama. But at first, I was just an English teacher. And because of that, a lot of my thinking about assessment is grounded in assessment methods that work in all different content areas, not just focused on like, how do we do this only in drama? Because that's just not who I am or how I think about teaching and learning. To me, the content is a little bit irrelevant in a learning space. To me, I think that teaching is often kind of the same. The way that we approach things, how we engage students, that is different. But like what is actually happening, the mechanisms of learning aren't so different. And so as a result, a lot of these ideas were grounded in work that I started doing as an English teacher. When I came back to NYU to get my PhD, I mean, I subsequently got another master's in English. I mean, I had a life of academia here. But when I was getting my PhD, I was really keen to sort of figure out, not just in my research, but also in my teaching here, working with folks who are going to be teaching artists or folks who are going to be classroom teachers, about how do we do this work? How do we find ways to give students, who are just learning about how to do this stuff? How do we give them practical opportunities to try some of this stuff out? And also, how do we give them insight into like what this actually looks like with young people? People are going to be classroom teachers, certified. They've got to do student teaching for a whole year. Well, if you're going to be a teaching artist, well, student teaching doesn't exist. One might have opportunities to do fieldwork opportunities, to do internships or otherwise, but they're just smaller in scale. And there's less time, certainly for most of the programs when people are training to do this work. And so I thought, we've got to really get at this. How are we going to teach this stuff? And so I started teaching this class on assessment. I don't remember if it was 2011 or 2013, whichever it was. But it was always my favorite class to teach because it was like the one time where we were only engaged in conversation about teaching and learning, nothing else. And I really, really loved that for sure, to be able to engage with folks about that specific area. So with this idea of KWL, that comes out of this English language arts teaching that I was doing. And there it's very much a linguistic form. We've got to be able to articulate what we know about a topic, fine. But also we can articulate what we want to know. Okay, so y'all decided to come here this morning. Certainly committing to doing anything on Zoom at this point is a lift because we've been zoomed out over the last number of years. But you are here. So what is it that you want to know about assessment in the drama classroom? Consider what made you decide to join us here for this session. So back into the chart, in the W column, find yourself a bullet. What are some of the things that you're curious about, some of the things that you want to know? My room, I think, is shaking because there is a dance class above me, and I think they are rehearsing a performance of the song Mamma Mia. So please disregard if I am distracted at any moment. But there's a pounding above, and it is surely Mamma Mia. Oh dear. Okay. Worlds are colliding right now. All right, how to collaborate with companies as a teaching artist. Okay, see, keep writing there. How to assess early elementary students. We'll talk a little bit about that. Sure. How to integrate more seamlessly, especially elementary. Integration is well, we'll talk about it. Rubric proven practices, scale of 3, scale of 4, scale of 5. We can talk about that. How to keep it upbeat and in a positive light, especially teaching after school when students have been assessed all day in their classes, where assessment can feel negative, where students can be hard on themselves. I love that. I love that. And we don't want to promote that at all. Applying theater games, exercises to lesson plans. We'll talk about that a little bit. Productive, painless concepts. I hope so. I want to know how to turn my perceptions, feelings about student growth and learning into data to share with community and funders. So really, it's about finding ways to document the learning that's happening or otherwise. And so we'll look at that. We'll look at that. Gig teaching artists to bring issues to the front. We'll talk about that. We'll that. Okay, so we can add additional ideas that are there and we can return to those. But I do want to turn to this assessment thought, which is that you can't assess what you didn't teach. When I said that to students, oh my God, 12 years ago, and they sort of looked at me like, what? What do you mean by that? What is that about? And it's just very plainly, we had a question that was there about rubrics and how to sort of handle rubrics appropriately. I mean, I look at classroom experiences sometimes, I spend a lot of time observing in-service teachers, student teachers. I mean, I'm just in the room a lot. And people have, oh, we're going to do some performance at the end. We're going to have a rubric. We're going to grade the students. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do it to the students. And I think, well, what is this about, this rubric that you have here? How are you using this? How is this a tool for teaching? What's going on here? Or is this just some evaluative thing that sits outside of the teaching and learning that's going on? Because you might have like in a rubric, in a scoring guide or otherwise. You might have a list of different criteria that you're looking for. You might have different concepts or skills you're expecting to see the young people do. Oh, look, they're going to have their memorization. Oh, look, they put a scene together. They're going to have staging. They're going to have vocal emphasis. I don't know, whatever that you decide are the skills you're going to list there. And then I think, all right, so how did you teach the students to do that thing? Well, we talked about the background and history of the play that the scene is from. All right, we got a sense of that. We talked about the characters and what's happening with them. We did some analysis. Very interesting. Okay. And so when did you teach them about how they're going to use their voice? If that's one of the things in the rubric. When did you teach them about memorization? If that's one of the things in the rubric. Oh, oh. So the idea is that if you're going to have something like a rubric or otherwise, that you're using that as a tool to teach the people, to share with the people that this is not just how they're going to be evaluated, but this is what we're focusing on. This is what I'm telling you that we're going to learn. And so we've got to find ways of sharing that, providing insight for the folks so that there's just clarity about what we're expecting to do. One of the folks in the KWL there, that they had put an idea there about IRB or getting consent from parents, which is like, what are we going to do with that assessment or evaluative material afterwards? Who are we going to share that with? Well, fundamental there is a question of ethics. All right. There's a question of consent there, an agreement about what we're getting into. And to me, in teaching and learning, there needs to be an agreement between the facilitator, the teacher, the leader, and the participants and the students. This is what we're agreeing to do together. And certainly in creating community agreements and that kind of thing, like we have a sense of that. We know what that can be. There also needs to be agreement about the content, what we're going to do. Not just about buy-in and engagement for the young people, which I'm not going to talk about, but rather just about clarity. This is what we're focusing on. We might have other experiences beyond that, but at the foundational level, this is what we're looking at. This is where we're headed. This is what we want to explore. So that way folks have a sense just at the outset of why we're doing this and what's expected and where this is headed. And some of that business of like, they're afraid or we need to make this not scary, that's part of where that needs to come from. That there's an understanding at the outset that this is what we're focusing on. And then that we're supporting each other in getting there, in achieving those things, and growing and developing in whatever ways that we've decided to focus on. But with that in mind, we do have to consider what it is that we're teaching, okay? So for some of you, I'm sure if you're working for a particular theater company or arts organization, community organization, or otherwise, there may be a set curriculum, there may be set content that you're required to cover that they're just providing to you. And so you, working for that organization, just have to sort of deliver that material. You might have choices about like how we're going to plan this, how we're going to structure this, what is the workshop going to look like, what is the residency going to look like, or otherwise. But like, there's some parameters that are set there that you're following. For other folks, we might be creating that on our own. For other folks, we might be attached to the national standards for theater or the New York State standards for theater, for those of us in New York City, the New York City blueprint for theater education. And whatever those kinds of materials are, if those are things that we're basing some of our drama instruction, our drama content on, we just have to bear in mind, as we know, drama, not compulsory anywhere in this country. All right. So if a school is offering drama, whether that's through a classroom teacher, whether that's through artist residencies, however that looks, after school programming and otherwise, that, nobody is required to be doing all of these things. So if we have some kind of framework that is suggesting that people are going to have some kind of arts experience from the time that they're in elementary school until they're in secondary school, well, that is some little trip to fantasy island. That's not real, okay? And so if we're not having that consistent, regular, sequential exposure to the arts, any framework that's even starting from that point of view is a little bit of a fantasy. It gives us a suggestion for what, like the folks who put those documents together, what they're thinking about in terms of what a sequential program might look like, or what might be sort of grade level appropriate or age appropriate sort of drama content. But it just doesn't necessarily exist for a lot of folks. So we can see those documents as an ideal, or we can see them as a vision for what's possible, rather than necessarily, as we know, a reflection of the reality. That aside, those standards are organized around the four artistic processes, as they call them, so that we should be creating theater, we should be performing, presenting, and producing theater, we should be responding to theater, we should be connecting to theater. And that all of those, in the way that this particular framework is set up, are meant to be on equal footing. And certainly a lot of the work that we do in drama in the United States is performing. That's it. We're having acting class. And I think, well, better that than nothing. But most folks performing drama isn't what they're going to do, isn't what they're interested in necessarily. And so just being mindful that creating work that could manifest in many different ways, that doesn't have to look like people standing on a stage and performing a scripted work, could be other things, is important to share with folks, as you know, but also developing these skills about responding to theater. So when I gave that example of what I observed in that classroom in London, that was sort of really the central facet of what the students were learning to do, was to respond and provide evidence and this kind of thing. So like, what does that look like? And this idea of connecting to theater or any of the art forms, what does that look like as well? And that being something that needs to be taught, that needs to be developed, that needs to be an integral part of the work that we're doing, if we're looking at that framework. When we were doing the KWL before, one of the groups mentioned social emotional learning, and certainly, particularly in drama, of the art forms, because of the collaborative nature of this art form, that so much of what we do really often does connect to these ideas of social emotional learning. And so using the Castle framework here, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness, that there is development that can happen, certainly while we're engaged in drama work. And so is this an instrumental part of what you're trying to achieve with the young people, areas that you want them to be growing and developing in? And if that is, great. Again, another framework here, other materials that we can draw upon, and just having that clarity. I said before, this idea of having this agreement with the students that this is what we're working on. This is why we're doing this work. Some people think, no, it should be in the background. I don't want to tell them that we're working on self-awareness because it's like so obvious. And what's that going to be? What is this? We're not trying to trick people. We're not trying to like, oh, the hidden benefits of doing the work. Hey, on that, I'm not into that. I'm not into that. If this is what we're trying to achieve, this is the area that we're working on, tell them, share that with them. Because if we have that, we might not understand all of the parameters of that, or all of the facets of it, but at least we know that that's what we're after here. And then having that, being able to share that with folks is really important. The last of these sort of ideas that I want to just promote is certainly from career and technical education, that they can talk sometimes about 21st century skills. And so we might be familiar with that kind of language, that folks should be developing critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, information literacy, media literacy, and the rest that we see on the screen here. And just to say, I don't have a stake in which framework one should follow or what one should prioritize, because I know, certainly from my background as a public school teacher, that like right now we're supposed to use the standards, or legally required to use them, certainly, but they'll change. They're not going to be the same standards for the next 40 years until we're retired. So we have to have some sense of how these documents are created and what they mean, but also that we have to be flexible, and being able to adapt to whatever other kind of external requirements might be placed on us in our teaching. And certainly, for folks who are like doing teaching artist work as like from the gig approach, going from one company to another, I mean, they all have different expectations for why we're doing the work and what we want the folks to learn. And so just to sort of lay those out there as different possibilities. But to me, I'm just curious about what it is that you are teaching or what it is that you are focusing on, whether that's for like your own intentions, what you're trying to achieve with the young people, or also like for the organizations that you're working for. What are they requiring of you? And so what I'm going to do now is to go into that document we were working on before, and we're just going to go down to the next task that's there. And so whether it is that you're doing devising or improvisation or process drama or whatever that might be, playwriting, scene performance, I don't know what. If we're in the document here, I've got some examples that are there. What do we teach? But what are you focusing on? And whether that's for your organization that you work with or partner with, whether that's for the school system that you work with, or whatever that you're trying to achieve on your own. What are the kinds of things that we're working on? Musical theater, acting, singing, dancing. Yes. Mamma Mia has calmed down for now. What will come next? They were rehearsing Titanic, the musical, at the beginning of the semester. So that was every day coming up through the walls. Um, Managing a TA roster, interesting. Using all theater content areas to connect to classroom learning, arts integration. Arts integration is interesting as we're having this conversation about what it is that we're teaching. We're going to use arts methods and strategies, but that we're focusing on the core content. I mean, that is a different ask. So here I'm suggesting we can have our drama content that we're doing. We can have our social emotional learning, 21st century skills. We could also be teaching English, science, math. Okay, so literacy, a different level, a different layer of content that we've got to focus on with the people. Playwriting, devising, ensemble building, dance making, interesting. Creative movement, storytelling, and social emotional learning. Developing skills through theater, interesting. Acting, singing, and dancing, sure. Teaching that careers in the arts is an option for rural areas. Sure. Theater for social justice. Theater for social justice. It's so interesting, you know. For folks who've done work in theater of the oppressed, and for some of us who worked with Augusto Boal at different points in his career, so interesting, you know, him sort of envisioning that theater of the oppressed is a rehearsal for the revolution. He sort of leads with that. This is what we're after. This is why we're doing the work. Get on board. uh, I think there's something about the clarity of expectations, purpose, what it is that we're working towards is really important. Creative drama, improvisation, dance, clowning, puppetry, playwriting, how to put up a musical, scheduling, logistics, all the moving pieces, as we know, body awareness, movement, and painting. All right. So the next that's in my list here is about learning objectives. Because once we have a keen sense of what it is that we're trying to, what we're focusing on, what the content is, what's sort of powering the work, okay, is then how do we articulate that in a way, how do we share that with young people, with the arts organization, with parents and families, whatever that it might be. We consider that teaching and learning are intrinsically linked. A learning objective should describe what students should know or be able to do as a result of engaging in this learning experience. So now rather than just saying like, okay, I'm doing my improvisation unit. I'm doing my playwriting with the students. Like, how am I going to actually articulate that with folks? And so that is then the next page in the document here. What do we want students to learn? We phrase these often and students will be able to, because the idea is like, after we've done this thing, we've spent this time together, this is what they're going to be able to do. So now sort of transition that content focus that you have, some kind of statement about what students are going to be able to do as a result of participating in that improvisation, or as a result of doing that playwriting, or that musical theater, or that creative movement. One of my students at NYU, who was in the class that first year when I taught it, said just the most marvelous thing. Never forgot it. He would say, teachers spend so much time, teaching artists spend so much time when they're putting a piece together for performance. And what are the aesthetics of that going to be? And how we're going to like get that performance of Mamma Mia perfect. And he would say, it's not transferring to Broadway. What are you focusing on here? And when I see these statements that you're writing here about what students are going to learn and be able to do, I know you're on our side here. Spatial awareness as individual and others in the space, how to work with and around others. Use script analysis to create a cue sheet, very tangible, practical drama skill. Fine. Confidently say their name and speak to others. Use Laban effort shapes to choreograph a story. Wonderful. Use their voices to express their stories freely in a brave space. Use vocal choices to perform a monologue. Create a piece of performance about an issue they care about. Identify creative choices that designers have made. Generate ideas to build ensemble-based production. Learn how to navigate artistic discussion and planning. How to use rigging techniques to hang lights. Use their bodies and voices to express emotions of a character. Create and perform a story with others. Work as an ensemble. All right, and we have some more ideas there. So I want to just extend this provocation to you all, that we need to have clarity about what it is that we're teaching and what we're trying to accomplish. And that once we have that clarity about what we expect students to learn, then we're going to be prepared to sort of start delving into how are we going to measure this? How are we going to make sense of this? How are we going to assess? How are we going to get a sense of whether or not the students are doing these things, they're growing and developing in these areas? What is that going to look like? All right. And so being explicit is really important. And there is in teacher training, teacher preparation, a lot of dialogue about learning objectives and the like, how they should be phrased, should we say them in teacher language, teacher-friendly language, or student-friendly language? What should that be? And to me, I think thinking about these things as being in student-friendly language is useful because that's who needs to hear them. Okay, what are we doing and why? What's the point of this? What are we working towards? What are we trying to work on? And so I want to just suggest that if we have clarity about our motivations, our objectives, that then being able to share that with folks is going to be a really useful element of assessment. I will briefly say that a lot of my thoughts about teaching and learning and structuring learning experiences are grounded in the gradual release of responsibility framework. Which I don't know if you're all familiar with that terminology necessarily, but as I describe it, I think it will become known to you. But Fisher and Fry have written this book. It's in its third edition. The idea is that teaching and learning should be in kind of an apprenticeship model, is what they would say, and that we're moving when we're in a learning experience from a starting place where there's a lot of teacher responsibility, so that I'm saying like you're going to be explicit about what the learning objectives are and what you're working towards. So like it's the teacher's responsibility to share that with the young people. They're not going to know that on their own. Um, Conversely, the students could identify their own objectives and what they want to learn, what they're interested in. And that we started out our exercise today here with what do we know about assessment? What do we want to know? That can be in that world of sort of giving the students voice and choice at the outset. But even still, the teacher's going to have to facilitate that experience, all right, and provide opportunities for students to voice that. So that we're starting in this place of the teacher having the responsibility of the stuff, that the teacher is going to convey to the folks what it is that we're working towards, that the teacher is going to convey examples of what these things look like, all right, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. If we're going to create agreements together, that's giving the expectation that there are things that are allowed in this space that are going to make this sort of safe and communal environment that we're trying to espouse, whatever we're going to do to develop an ensemble or otherwise. And that it's the teacher's responsibility to sort of make that happen. We want to engage and involve the young people as much as we can. And after we work with folks for a while, certainly we may arrive at a point where they're able to do that on their own. But at a starting place, do they even know to expect that? They don't know you. They don't know who you are or why you're there. And so you know that very much, particularly as teaching artists, if you're dropping into sessions all the time. I mean, it is constantly reintroducing yourself, your expectations, and what it is that you want to do. And so that is sort of the same idea. But that over time, the teacher is going to have to do less and less. That the young people are going to be able to engage in the work more and more, and ideally over time, that they'll be able to do that independently. Now, certainly in drama work, we do very few things that are really independent. There are some, but collaborative art form, we're often working together and in partnership with each other. And so that is generally where our goal is. But that at a point that we would be able to step out of it and the students would be able to do that thing on their own. And to say like, what is assessment, or what are we working towards, or how does it not feel high stakes, or whatever that might be? Well, then being able to do the thing on your own without you being there is what you're working towards. And so having some sense of that. And when I say do it on their own without them working there, they could be 5. I mean, what is that going to look like? I don't know. I've been in some magical spaces where 5-year-olds are running the show in a positive way. So anything is possible, but that's the idea. How much sort of autonomy are students going to be able to have, and how can we provide opportunities for that to manifest? When we think about assessment, though, and sort of formalizing this, we have some instruction here that there are 3 types of assessment in an educational framework, all right? We have assessment that happens before the learning is going on, which is called diagnostic assessment. We have assessment that happens during the teaching, during the learning, which is called formative assessment. And then we have assessment that happens after the learning, the summative assessment. And so what I'm going to do now is just to sort of talk about each of these a little bit. And then looking at the time, and then I'm going to hear from you, I think is where we're going to end up. Because I think that will be a better use of our time than me going through the example that I have. So just with diagnostic assessment, what will I do at the start of the unit or lesson to figure out what students already know so I can build on that? Sometimes called pre-assessments. Diagnostic assessments determine students' entry points. They're often informal. So just to say, the way that I set up this workshop today, that we're using this KWL framework, what do you already know about assessment? What do you want to know? That I have an idea, okay, I could write a book here, all right, I've prepared this workshop. I have a sense of what it is that I want to cover, what I think might be valuable to the population that I expect to be here. But of course, I don't know exactly who's going to show up on the day. And so I need to get a sense of what is of interest to you, what is worthwhile to you, so that I can then be making adjustments to my teaching in accordance with what it is that y'all need or want. And so certainly this might, for many of us, be an intuitive practice. I walk in, I'm going to have a 6 weeks residency with these students. I'm going to be there 2 days a week, and I need to know who my leaders are. I need to know what experience that they've had in drama before so that I can sort of like draw that out and include that and incorporate that in what we're going to do, because that'll be important. If I'm doing musical theater, God help me, who are my movers? Okay, who can say what's going on? Okay, so that we just have some lay of the land. And that's what diagnostic assessment is about. And that when I say formalized, I mean it's an informal mode often, but it is a formal way of thinking about our work. That we have to have a moment of figuring out, where are these people already? Even if we're doing social emotional learning, what self-awareness do they already have? Do they know that term? Does it mean anything to them? And because so many schools might be implementing SEL, because students may or may not have had drama experience. I don't know. Because if we're doing drama integration, God help me, I got to know what they're working on in science, in ELA, whatever that the content area is that we're meant to integrate with. Or else what are we doing? How is it going to function? And so just being mindful that that is like an explicit thing that we must do at the outset, is to sort of figure out where we're starting from. And again, this idea of transparency, that like it's informative for me as the facilitator and instructor. It's also informative for the young people. Oh, oh, I do know stuff. I do know what this is. Okay, I'm gonna use it in a different way, I guess, because like you're talking about things that I don't know about yet, but like, oh, those things that I have already are valuable, are important to this person who's joined me in this space. And so that being a starting place, all right? Got to determine students' entry points. There are some general diagnostic considerations. So sometimes like just figuring out like what the social dynamics are of the young people, what their interests are, because we're going to be doing devising work. Okay, so like devising work about what? That could be any number of things. So what are the kinds of things that they're interested in, the themes that they might want to explore and the like? How well do these students collaborate? How willing are they to take risks? What are the social dynamics in the room? Are they interested in creating or performing? Do they prefer responding and connecting? Any number of questions that you could ask. But the idea is sort of like just to get a general sense of how these folks are working together. Okay. And then we could have specific diagnostics. Okay. What do they know about this content already? So that way I'm making sure that the things that I'm sharing with the people is not just duplicative of what they already know or what they're able to do already, and rather that we're going to be expanding in some way, building in some way, growing. All right. And so just having that in mind, that there are different approaches to this. I mentioned already that I started out with a KWL here. Another way of thinking about this, if we can be academic for a moment, Vygotsky, a learning theorist, talked about his zone of proximal development, that folks are going to be able to sort of learn best when whatever it is that they're being asked to do in a learning experience is sort of just beyond what they're able to do already. Because if it's too far beyond what they're already able to do, like we're not going to get there. And so rather we've got to have some acknowledgement, some sense, some drawing out of what the people already know, and then we're going to plan to sort of bring them just a step beyond that, okay? And that in thinking incrementally in that way, in thinking about like we might have a grand vision, we might be able to scaffold, to provide people with support that's going to get them to make a huge amount of growth in a short amount of time. But even so, that we're always sort of basing that on what the foundation is. So in this example that's on the screen here, we see this as a stair step kind of approach here, that if what we were trying to get the folks to do early elementary, that we might be focusing on facial expression, okay? And when they're thinking about a particular character, all right, I'm looking for a book here, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's the book that I come to first, all right? So if we're thinking like, okay, so what is Goldilocks like? And so we can see like one facial expression that represents Goldilocks. Goldilocks, oh my God. Maybe our goal is that we want to have 3 different expressions. So Goldilocks when she's happy, Goldilocks when she encounters one of the bears, Goldilocks after she's eaten. I don't know. Not after she's been eaten, but after she has eaten at the table, you know. Um, so that's where we're heading towards. We want to have this opportunity to have multiple different visions of what her life and experiences are like. Cannot believe I'm using Goldilocks. Um, and so that learning then is going to be in that middle. So we already sort of know what a facial expression is. We can do that, but we're thinking about characters perhaps in a one-dimensional way or only at one point in time. And so what if we think about them over the course of a narrative? God help me. Goldilocks. All right. So oftentimes when we're doing drama work, we'll start out with warm-ups or games. And I am forever commenting on lesson plans that students create. But I'm like, I love that you're doing this warm-up. Why? And how are we going to know why we're doing it? What is this for? And it's like when we start to sort of tease out what the skills or concepts or what we're trying to ascertain their experience of or their understanding of at the outset, well, now we're getting somewhere. Now, can we make sense of that with the people? Can we share that with the people so they'll know? All right, so that being a starting place. That I had here, this KWL that we've worked on. You can use any number of strategies to achieve or accomplish that idea of finding out what the people know, what they want to know. Afterwards, we'll look at what they learned. But just thinking about that as a framework, as a structure, as a way of making sense of what it is that we're trying to accomplish here with a diagnostic assessment. In other content areas, it could become, particularly with older students, some kind of pre-writing activity, sometimes called an entrance ticket. A pre-assessment. So that's the idea that you're going to give a version of the assessment at the beginning of the experience to see what they're able to do. And then after we've done all of the teaching and learning throughout the experience, then now we're going to do the final thing. I mean, asking the students to perform their scene from Mamma Mia on day 1. And then now we're going to learn about character development and whatever that is. And now we'll have like this improved performance of Mamma Mia later. You could do that. It would take a lot of time. And I'm not sure that that's the best way to tease that out at the outset, but that is a thing that exists. Having just a dialogue with the people, informal Q&A, or some kind of self-assessment practice and goal setting. So if you tell the people that we're going to work on playwriting, so you have sort of knowledge in advance that the people already had some experience of playwriting or they've worked with scripts before, that this is going to be something that's not entirely new to them. So that then you go into it and you say, all right, so what do we already know about playwriting? What do we feel like we're already like prepared to do in terms of playwriting? And what are we hoping to accomplish in this time that we have together, in this residency experience? What would we like to achieve? And that's like at the highest level where students are able to articulate that for themselves. Again, we can get them there, no matter the age group, but it just takes time to develop those practices and make them accessible for diverse populations of students, diverse age groups, and the rest. Beyond those diagnostics then, so once you sort of figured out what those starting points are, what those entry points are for the students, then we're going to start engaging in the teaching of the content, which means we're also going to start engaging with formative assessment. And in formative assessment, we call these informal checks. What informal checks will I make as the unit or the residency unfolds to make sure students are learning the material? And when I say learning the material, Faye, I don't love that. I think that they are growing, developing, that their awareness is expanding, or however that we might want to phrase it. Whatever it is that we're focusing on, what our learning objectives are, that they're making progress in that direction, okay? And the second bullet that's here, how will I give them process feedback as they work so they learn from any mistakes or misunderstandings? The idea is that like, while students, it's really hard, I think, in the arts, because we don't want to stifle creativity. We don't want to shunt people's imaginations. And so we have to be very sensitive to that reality. But also, if we think about, while students are engaged in collaborative work often, that we might see our role as a side coach, offering suggestions, offering pointers, highlighting for folks what they're doing that is successful, what's going well, whether that's like in the content itself or in the learning objective itself, or also related to other things, how they're collaborating, how they're communicating, how they're sharing, whatever that, we might want to highlight in the moment. But then also to say, and, yes, and what would you, what do you feel like might be a next step for that young person? And so just being mindful of that again as part of what formative assessment is. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be something that's, so hard and fast and evaluative, but rather that it can just be informing, all right? So when we think about strategies of formative assessment, that it's just noticing, just being aware, okay? If I am working towards people being able to put together a performance of a monologue, as somebody suggested there, that I am going to be watching the students as they're interacting. So if I had folks who are working on monologues, I might have them performing in small groups so that they're giving an opportunity to sort of share their piece as they're developing it, that they might be giving feedback to each other, however that we've set that learning experience up, but that I am not going to just set back and say, all right, now they're doing it. Look, they're doing it. And trust me, I know when they're doing it and it's successful, that is an accomplishment unto itself. But also that I'm just being keenly aware. Okay, what is it that the learning objective is here? What is it that I've told the people that we're working on? Okay, how are they making progress in that direction? Or are they? What is that about? And just that I'm keeping that in mind all the time as the folks are engaged in the work. I can be formal-ish, asking the people to write about and reflect on what they've done that day or what their experience had been. So if that's in an exit ticket, if that's in a journal. And I think, this is an after-school program. Like they did this writing all day in class. I'm going to ask them to write again after. Well, we want this to be meaningful to the people. If we want them to remember what we did, what would be so wrong with that? I think, when I was doing my high school shows, if they had asked me to keep a journal, I mean, my memory is such, I remember every detail, every day, every moment. I'm obsessed. But for most people, they don't, they've moved on. And so what an interesting record that would be, just to go back and think, what did we do? All right, what was I feeling and thinking when the cast list came out, when we were expected to be quiet backstage until we were needed on stage? What if we actually were watching and learning from what the director was doing with the other performers instead of being absent, silent, not heard? And so I think there may be ways that we can use some of those strategies that they're otherwise having throughout their workday that might support the work that we're doing. The last bullet that's here, this idea of pre-assessments like dress rehearsals. And so that example that I started with at the beginning for what I observed in that drama class in London was about that. Okay. The last piece then is summative assessment. So what's happening at the end of the experience that's going to be the final measure and the final moment as to what the folks have learned. So before, when I talked about giving the people feedback that's going to sort of acknowledge what their successes are, but also sort of highlight and identify what their next steps might be. In summative assessment, that's done because summative means it's over. We might give the folks some feedback that says, in the future, if you were to do this kind of thing again, here's what might be something to think about, something to consider. Here's what your next step could be if you wanted to do more work in this area. But for most people, they're not, they're done. So instead, just acknowledging and highlighting the growth that they've made is what's sufficient. So what are the students going to do to demonstrate what they've learned as what we're doing at the end of the unit? In traditional academic settings, they're doing a test. There's going to be a rubric or something, and there could be. But when I mentioned earlier about a rubric and that being a teaching tool, when I mentioned earlier about clarity, about being explicit, if you identify, okay, this is the learning objective, then some of that language is going to need to be in whatever this rubric is. Or rather, the language in the rubric is going to need to inform what you're putting in the learning objective, what we're working towards, because they're two pieces of the same pod. One is what we're saying at the outset, what we're going to do, and now at the end, this is how we're checking to see if we did those things. And so just being mindful of that. Some organizations, some schools might have a set rubric. This is what we always use for all of the performances. I mean, I guess that makes it easier. There's consistency for the students. They know what to expect. But then often the teaching or the experience has nothing to do with that rubric. I don't know how to make sense of that. I don't know what the point of that is. All right. So if we're going to be in alignment, if we're going to be trying to achieve something, because the organization says this is what we're doing, the school says this is what we're doing, the state, if we think about learning standards, they say what we're supposed to do, then all right, then we have to sort of bring that to bear. We have to use that kind of language. We have to make sure that those expectations are clear. We can be humble. It wasn't my decision that we had to do it this way, but this is where we are. And so we have to include that in part of what our interaction is going to be, and part of what our learning is going to be. And that's fine. You could turn this around, certainly, because oftentimes summative assessment can be evaluative in an external way. Here's what I'm saying about your work, but rather, what if the students sort of set that up? All right. What if the students identify what we understand to be good work? Here's what we think would make a good monologue performance, what would be meaningful to us. So then the students can create the criteria or the learning objective. The students could generate the rubric. All right. We could co-construct them together. We're not going to just give it to the students. I'm going to give some suggestions. You're going to give some suggestions. We put that work together. That the students could be assessing each other. Okay. And so that's what we heard in that first example today, that they were giving feedback to each other. And then the last piece, of course, is that I can give feedback to myself. All right. If I started out in diagnostic assessment with identifying my own goals, my own sense of what I already know about this and what I'm trying to achieve in this experience, now at the end, I can reflect back on that. So when someone mentioned earlier about what they wanted to know, what they wanted an experience of, like, how am I going to document this, or how am I going to have material that I can share? I mean, we do have questions about parental consent and the like how we can share this material with others, but that's where that's at. Okay, that the students can perform the things, the students can reflect on the thing, the students can write about the thing, that I can just be clear about this is what I was trying to learn, or what I was trying to teach, what we were trying to achieve, what our objectives were. Okay, as we were working through the experience, here are the different moments, the different ways that I was checking on this informally while it was going on. And then at the end, here's how we demonstrated that we were able to do that thing, or what growth or development that we had made. And whatever the metric is that we're looking for, social, emotional, it doesn't matter. It is all the same. That you're clear about articulating that with the folks, making sure that we're all have some understanding of what it is that we're working on, and then that those moments of measurement, be them formal or informal, that we're just keeping track of that as it's going along. Whether that's in narrative form, whether that's with a rubric in a chart form, fine. Whether that's with a checklist that we're doing. Am I doing the checklist? Is the student doing the checklist? Are they evaluating each other? What does that look like? Just put it on paper. Everybody can see the paper. Don't put their names on it. However it is, get parental consent if we need to, depending on, where it is that we're working and what's required of us. There are different ways of figuring that out. Okay. So however it is, what's this? I don't care about that. Okay, so that we have this assessment piece that's happening before, we have what's going on during, and we have what's going on after. I am mindful of the time, and so we have options. I don't want to do the option. I'm not going to do the option. I'm going to introduce the option, and then you have the link to the spreadsheet, so you have the link to these links that I'm going to show you. So the sample lesson that I was going to share with you is one that I developed with a teacher on the Upper West Side. We did the work with her students. Then subsequently, I have done many different demonstrations of this with students at NYU, at conferences, all over, always doing this work. So I have recordings of this lesson with adults, permissions, complicated with young people. But it was based on a book called Waiting for the Biblioburro, and also Biblioburro. And if we're familiar with the Spanish and what that translates to, okay, so a donkey library. And the idea, it was based on this reading initiative that was implemented in the DOE here in New York City a couple of years ago. That was about how kids access books differently in different parts of the world. And so this particular book by Jeanette Winter was one of the ones that was on that reading list. There were others, My Librarian is a Camel, The Librarian of Basra, etc. And so in this unit, the idea was that students are going to use drama to have a sense of um, they needed to sustain their roles, listen and take turns, and expand upon elements in the story while participating in a role drama. And that language that's there as a learning objective is drawing upon the learning standards for theater in New York. And I can't remember if this was second grade or third grade right now, but in any case, if one looked at that document, you'd be able to make sense of that. So if I'm going to say that students are going to be sustaining their roles, they're going to be listening and taking turns, they're going to build on the story. When I start out with my diagnostics at the beginning, I'm getting a sense of like, do they know how to be in role and what that looks like? Do they know how to listen and take turns? Do they know how to expand on ideas that are shared in the story? And so once I have some sense of where they're at initially, as we're going through this experience of living out the story of this guy who starts this donkey library in Colombia, how are they growing and developing in these different ways? And so every time that we're engaging in a different strategy or activity as we're moving through this experience, that I'm always sort of checking in informally about how they're developing and growing in these areas. And then by the time that we get to the end of the unit, so when you look at the example, you'll see that there's articulation of the different strategies that are used and the type of work that students are doing. Always coming back to these three bullets, though, in what ways are they doing these things at this time? Not every activity involves all three of these. Some of them might only focus on one, but the idea is that we're just sort of checking in about that. And then at the end, then I have this sort of chart, which lists the criteria using the language directly from, again, the New York State Learning Standards. Students are sustaining their role throughout the activity, while enrolled students appropriately listen and take turns. Students incorporate elements from the books and appropriately expand upon them. And so that I can rate those with a check plus, a check minus, and I can give comments to the people. And so here it's like, if we're 7 years old in second grade, do we necessarily care very much about this language that's here? Maybe not. But that we're focusing the people around this idea of like, what does it mean to sustain a role, to stay in role, to not break character, that kind of thing. What does it mean to take turns in life, let alone when we're in an improvisation moment? What does that look like? And then also that we're able to sort of take an idea that's in a picture book. I mean, picture books often have very little text, you know? So there's just a little idea that's there, but we can create a whole world for that character beyond just that one little idea that's there in the book. And so that we're focusing then on creativity and imagination and articulating our thoughts, sharing, contributing, and the like. And so where are we at with that? So that's the experience. But that was a brief version of that. As I say, you can access the link to the rest of those things. But for now, I do want to just turn to a little bit of discussion. So we have some time left together. And so what are some lingering thoughts or questions that you have at this point? And whether you want to put those in the chat or you want to unmute and speak to us, you can. Let me do this. Pretending I know how to use Zoom. Okay. I have some memory of this. Uh, Kareem?
Hi. I have a question about assessment, which is so you're working within a rubric or a set of co-created learning goals with your students, and you understand everyone understands what we're looking for, what we're working towards, and that's a really wonderful shared language. And I wonder, how would you propose capturing or documenting or acknowledging the learnings that appear in the classroom that have not been predetermined, that have not already been identified, right? That things just emerge, right?
Yep.
Like maybe you're teaching playwriting, and you're not looking at stage directions, right, as a learning objective, but something comes up in someone's play where you're like, this is a great moment to talk about effective stage directions. So how do we like make space for those things as well when they pop in unexpectedly?
Oh, great. So here's the thing. I'm going to expose a central element of my privilege, which is having my own classroom, which I haven't had for a real long time, but I remember it well. And I was very big on materials that students, that like we would collect artifacts that we could then reference and return to later. So I would keep posters in the room of things that like we were working on or definitions or whatever that might be. And so to me, I think, all right, I can list out like what the objectives are. I can have that there and that lives there. I could make a chart that's going to show like how we as a class are developing on these things and in what way. And I can think creatively about how to set that up. But then also now I can have a list of look what else came up that we didn't know before or that we weren't thinking about, but now becomes very relevant and central to what we're doing. And so now that's part of the artifacts of what it is that we're living. I was with a teacher the other day and they were having like a discussion and it was meant to kind of, rather than just telling the people about blocking and what blocking is and what that looks like, that they were sort of drawing it out of the students and what their experience had been in the past working with directors and working on stage. And then as he's going, like he has like a couple of bullets in his PowerPoint, like how he wanted to define it. And I thought, the students are sharing wonderful things. How are we keeping track of that? And then I think, well, okay, in a theater setting, so a stage manager sometimes is tasked with writing down blocking, or an assistant stage manager might do that. Or we could have a stage manager in class whose job is to take notes for what's going on. You know, that there are ways of doing this where it's like not always incumbent upon me as the facilitator, because I mean, I'm trying to do all of the things. I can't do everything, but like people in the room can do that work. And so just sort of figuring out what those things are. And then particularly for people who have to do some kind of a report afterwards or whatever that might look like, you know, what did the students learn? What was their experience? To be able to say, all right, we were working towards these objectives. Here's the growth and development that we made towards these. And then also, here are the other things that came up that we weren't necessarily planning for. But once they were there, then we were able to add those layers as well, or at least to acknowledge that those happened, And then again, my privilege, I teach at the same class every year. I'm going to do it again. So now I'm going to make decisions about what those objectives ought to be based on what that experience was. I mean, I didn't realize that we needed to focus on that, or I didn't realize that that was something that might be an area that we could have focused on, but now I know it's there. And so now I'm going to have to include that as part of my planning going forward. Thanks. Thanks for the question. Angelica, I'm noticing your comment. There's a play about this called For Carmen in San Sebastian that's performed in upstate New York. I will want you, Angelica, to email me more information about that. Okay, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Right. So now, just so that we can be sharing good practice, I think, closure. Returning to the KWL, what have we learned about assessment in the drama classroom? Consider facts, concepts, procedures, but also feelings, which were the ideas that we had before. So going back to this document here, which I'm going to grab the link for again. I'm going to send that. Okay. And so we can return there. What are things that we learned is the way that this is phrased. But I also want to encourage you not just to think of like things that you learned that you didn't know before, but perhaps there are different questions that you have now or different wonderings that you hadn't thought about before. And so you might just put a Q, as I'm going to do, and then you could articulate that. Okay, I'm gonna not share this on the screen while people are thinking about what to write. Come back to it after. Right, while folks are starting to write, I'm just reflecting back on the W. Apologies that I'm looking away, it's just I have two screens that are happening here. because I just can't have this all at once. How to collaborate with companies as a gig teaching artist to bring issues to the front. Think about that. How to assess early elementary students. So a lot of what I talked about today, well, required a certain linguistic dexterity, that's the word I'll use, that prioritizes English, native English speakers, that prioritizes older students who might be better prepared to articulate their thoughts and ideas in particular ways. And so to me, adaptation is always key. When I started doing the manuscript for the book, I wanted to have it set up that like there would be examples for elementary students, there would be examples for middle school students, example for high school students. I had like little sections that said, but my students are 5. How are they going to do this? And I spent a lot of time in the revision process because my experience, was a high school teacher, so I don't have a lot of experience myself working with younger students, so I'm relying a lot on the teachers that I partner with from their experience and expertise. But what I discovered, I think, was that so much of what we do is about verbal and discussion and writing, and so it's just finding ways to do that are visual and aren't necessarily linguistically oriented. And it's a challenge, but I think, certainly for those of you who work with younger students, you have it how you live and breathe, what you're used to doing. And so that's the thing. How do I convey expectations to folks in non-linguistic ways, in visual ways, in kinesthetic ways, so in our bodies. When we think about demonstrations and examples and that being part of what would happen while we're teaching for folks, that we're going to be showing examples and demonstrations that are things that are age appropriate, often with folks their own age who are doing that work, what that looks like for people their age, but also that you can get them to describe or get them to articulate what they see and understand looking at that thing. And that being a starting place for sort of developing a sense of how to convey information and ideas to younger people, if we're not used to that, don't have that background. How to integrate more seamlessly, especially elementary. And so there's more to be done there. Our funders are also interested in soft skills learned by students, which is harder to formally assess. Any tips for that? Thanks for asking that, Catherine. I think the notion of soft skills, I think the challenge that we have there is that people are just generally not good at being explicit about the fact that that's what they're focusing on. So if, I was using the terminology from Castle with the SEL framework, because to me, it's easy to use that language because it's in front of us and it's something that we're often, or not all familiar with, but at least it's something that we can access and we can name, we can have that language. And there, like, if what it is that we're going to be focusing on, I just have to go back in my slides to find where that was. That we're going to talk about decision making or building relationships or whatever that is, that just being able to say that this is what we're focusing on, I mean, would be significant enough because it's so rare that people do articulate that that's what the goal is or that's what they're trying to achieve. Certainly not with the young people. They just have it in the background. We're going to do the drama work, but like really we're focusing on this other thing. Like, why does this need to be some kind of sleight of hand? Why can't we just tell them this is what it is that we're trying to do? When I gave that idea of diagnostic before about sort of self-assessment and goal setting, like how well are we able to make decisions right now? When I had my example there of the process-based drama lesson, that one of the things we're supposed to focus on is like listening and taking turns. How well do we do that? All right. And certainly with young people, like, I want to please the teacher. I'm going to say I do that thing really well. Great. Okay. So now we have this space where like we've got 20 young people in the room. We've got 20 people who all say that they do this super well. And yet we start engaging in different activities and then we see, well, strangely, I'm observing something that's different from what we said before. So we need to improve on that. How are we going to do that? How are we going to achieve that? How can we work together to make that thing happen? And so I think just having those conversations, again, is a starting place. That would be terrific. But also then that in this summative assessment moment, that now we're able to say, all right, at the outset, this is how the people said that they were able to do this thing. And you can find, I mean, there's all kinds of tools and forms and things that you can find online, some of them visual, some of them linguistic based, about how people can evaluate themselves in these ways. And so then we sort of do the teaching and the learning, and then we evaluate ourselves again. Now, how do we say? My experience has been that like now that we're sort of establishing that awareness, that like now we're not just trying to please the teacher, now we actually are being thoughtful about what it means to take turns or to have good relationship skills or whatever that might be. That afterwards people are much harder on themselves because now they're being honest, or now they have a better sense of what that actually means, and so they're just thinking about it in a different way. And so then to say, like, after the event, well, if I'm just looking at the numbers, at the outset, the people rated themselves very high. Afterwards, they've rated themselves very low. Well, how can I say then that my program was successful? Well, then it's just to say people are not honest at the beginning. And it's not even maybe that they're not honest, that they don't understand the fullness of what that thing is. That people at the outset want to say things that are going to please the teacher and the like. And so then that you have some kind of notes or some kind of way of keeping track of, all right, a week later, and this is how the students are actually interacting. These are my observation notes. Okay, that here they're rating themselves in this way, but like, that's not what I'm saying here. And so then we have these conversations that you're able to talk about what those intervention moments are, or what those discussions are, what those teaching moments are, whether that's strategies, drama activities, whatever it is, however that you're going about it, addressing those areas. And then you're able to then say, okay, so now afterwards, this is what they say. And that from what people rated on the forums, I don't see growth and development, like, because it's just not how this functions, but rather based on my own awareness of the students, my own noticings, my own evaluations, that's sort of where we started at. And the kinds of conversations that we're having later, or the way that students are interacting later, that here's what I'm noticing, what I'm observing. And that those observation notes, I mean, if I work with students for a year, so this is how they rated themselves in September, then in October, after we've gotten real about what we're doing, then we have a better sense of what their starting place is or what that looks like. And then I'm periodically checking in, and then I can see that. Then that kind of growth is going to be more evident in some kind of standardized metric. But I mean, if you're just working with people for a couple of weeks or in a short term, I mean, what is the real expectation? How much are people going to change and be different in such a short period of time? And so rather just to be able to focus, like, here are the activities that we're using, here's the framework that we're using, here's the structure, here's, what we noticed and observed about the young people when we started. Here are the things that we've done in the meantime, and here's where we think that people ended up, that can be valuable and worthwhile. I'm over time, naturally. So thank you all for being here again. I've shared my email address already, so if you would like to contact me, feel free, please do. And I am really glad that I got to share this time with you today.
Jonathan, thank you so much. I know that 90 minutes may feel like a lot of time, but it's really not. I appreciate
I know.
you creating such like a robust session. I feel like there are so many amazing tools and things to take away from here. So I'm just so grateful to you for kicking us off this year with this incredible session. Folks, this is just session number 1 today. So we have another one happening today at 4 p.m. I just popped a link to the conference schedule in the chat. So if you can join us later at 4, we are continuing with a session called Arts Education Advocacy from the Top Down. We hope we will see you there. And please know that I'll be following up via email with all of the resources and links that Jonathan has shared in the chat. So you'll have access to those again as well. And thank you as well to our ASL interpreters. So grateful for you all. Jonathan, again, thank you. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you all again soon.